Hello and welcome to Downtown. I'm your host, Robbie Haig, and as usual, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. I have invited Richard Neely back again. We enjoyed his program so much a few months back that we felt he had a great deal more to add to what he has said before. Richard has a PhD in chemistry from Brown University, and he has developed an interest in alchemy to the arcane science of witchcraft and magic. Welcome back, Richard.
Oh, thank you.
Very good to see you.
Yeah. It's nice to be back, and I would caution you, I realize it's a half-hour show. That's about half the sand getting down here, so keep an eye on my timepiece, if you will.
Time, yes.
I've brought along my research assistant. Every time I say something that is not true or untoward, he will let me know by saying nevermore.
Okay.
In the spirit of Halloween, I thought we should talk about a little bit about the history behind two classic horror stories, Frankenstein and Dracula. These were two movies that scared the heck out of me when I was a kid. So much so that I still retain some of that fear today.
Now, do we usually hear of both of them in the same voice?
They are two classics.
Okay.
Separately. I'm
Separately.
going to show
Excellent.
you that there is a thread, there is a connection
Okay.
between the two, although chronologically they were very different in time.
Good.
So the first one, I'd like to bring your attention to a book called The Lives of the Necromancers by William Godwin. Now, necromancers were basically magicians who used dead bodies, either for predicting the future or casting spells, and necromancer itself was the origin of the term black arts, because it became a negromancer, negro being black, so the black art. But William Godwin was the father of Mary Godwin. Her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, who was a very noted feminist, as was William Godwin, a very liberal politician who wrote historically on the politics of the time in London. As a result, he had a number of followers, among whom was Percy Shelley. Now, Mary Godwin, who received her education through her father, would have been familiar with the lives of the necromancers and that whole concept of rejuvenation of life. That's going to play a role in Frankenstein, of course.
Am I a step ahead of you with Shelley and Mary?
Yes, because Mary fell in love with Shelley. She was only 17.
Oh.
Shelley was coming to William Godwin's workshop as a student. Mary fell in love with him, and basically he was married.
Oh.
He was estranged from his wife, but her father, William Godwin, was not very happy with this arrangement, but she eloped with Percy to Europe.
While he was married?
While he was married.
Oh my.
Yes. Now, you had the Godwin family, you had the Shelley family, all of whom were saying, look, this is terrible, the big scandal. So they spent some time in Europe, they came back, she was pregnant by Percy Shelley. Now it turns out that Harriet, when Percy left her, she was pregnant also.
Oh dear.
So there was all these complications. The She had a birth that was premature. The child died. Harriet had her child. That child died.
Wow.
Harriet died soon after. That freed up Shelley to get married to Mary Shelley.
Wow.
Well, they loved to go to Europe, sometimes just to escape the creditors, because although Shelley was from an aristocratic family, they disapproved of his behavior, and they didn't want to give him any of his inheritance to spend on these liberal political ideas. That it would be a waste of money. Well, they did go to Europe again. Mary Godwin had a stepmother. William Godwin married when Mary was about 4, and she had some stepsisters. One of her stepsisters was Claire Clairmont. When she went to Europe with Shelley, Claire accompanied her. They grew very friendly with Byron, George Gordon Lawn Byron. He had the money. They spent a summer on Lake Geneva in Switzerland. That turned out to be a very wet summer, and it turned out Claire Clairmont was Byron's lover. So you had the 4 of them, and you had another party, Gordon Lord Byron's physician, John Polidori. Well, throughout the wet summer and in the evenings when there was nothing much else to do, they were talking about maybe we should all write a ghost story. And that went on through the summer, and as it turned out, that was when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And it was called Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus. This was in 1819.
Wow.
She was only 19 when she wrote it.
Really?
Yeah, so in the course of that, when they did get back to London, she was pregnant by Shelley. It was at that time that we had the Harriet, Percy's first wife, committed suicide. Her body was found in the Thames, basically.
Wow.
That freed him up to marry. He didn't marry her right away. They had to work on it. But the novel was published shortly thereafter, Frankenstein.
Did she write the novel in a
Yes.
summer?
Yes, pretty much. And it was thought at the time that Percy Shelley had contributed a great deal. I don't really believe that. Shelley was a classical romantic poet, and I refer back to the concepts of magic and rejuvenation of life that would have been influenced Mary Godwin through her father.
Mm-hmm.
So that became the legend of Frankenstein. It was reasonably well received, but there were she went on to write a number of things after Shelley died. He was a sailor, and he took a boat out on one of the lakes there to go back one night, and he never returned. He drowned at sea. She went on to attempt to complete a biography of Percy Shelley, but Shelley's family said, "We don't want that biography out in the public." So they gave her an annual subsistence allowance if she would not write the biography. But that basically was the Frankenstein novel, and it then became the basis for the movie, which occurred in 1941. Now that's so over 100 years later.
Right.
And that brought fame to Boris Karloff. And then the whole string of movies based upon the Frankenstein character. Frankenstein as a character, even in the original book, the novel, he was a sympathetic figure in this sense. Because he was cobbled together from different parts of bodies and everything, he was not the most attractive person in the world. So he would...
He had a lot of stitches on him. So.
Yeah, well, the classic one is that with a bolt through the
Right.
neck to get him going, to jumpstart him, if you will. But he would instill fear and loathing wherever he went, and he realized that. And he was hurt by it. He couldn't be accepted by society. So that was Frankenstein and the subsequent movies. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, Frankenstein does the Son of Frankenstein, okay. But basically Boris Karloff's characterization was the classic. Back to the origin of Frankenstein in the story on Geneva, Dr. Polidori comes up with a story called The Vampire. Well, and typically there is a lot of European and mainly Central European folklore regarding the vampire, who basically lives forever by drawing blood from other
Whoever.
human victims. Well, he had written this story, but it wasn't until Brad Stoker, who was the business manager for the Lyceum Theatre in London, who wrote the story of Dracula. It was not, as we've said, Polidori had written about vampires. There were other vampire stories, notably Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, which was a story of a lesbian vampire, if you will.
They really had minds that went...
This was the Victorian era, and there were
Really?
lots of, this was H. Rider Haggard, Sheridan Le Fanu, Edward Ryman, a wonderful, lush atmosphere for this kind of story.
Really?
H.
Vivid
Rider-
imagination.
H. Rider Haggard, all of that, and they sold very well. Unfortunately, Frankenstein didn't, nor did Dracula for a while. Dracula by Stoker was modeled on Sir Henry Irving, who was the chief actor at the Lyceum Theatre. And Stoker wished he would play Dracula, and he modeled much of Dracula's movements and dramatic flair on Henry Irving. Irving never played Dracula. But now, his vampire was basically a gentleman, a count. And with all the smooth diplomatic moves of this. And while he had some background, the name Dracul, basically Stoker picked out of the Wallachian folklore that said there was a Count Vlad II who was in charge of defending Christendom against the Turks in that area. Vlad became a member of an order called the Dragon. Well, in the local language, that's a drak is a dragon. Ul means the. So Vlad II was Dracul. Vlad III, his son, became Dracula. Dracula, his son, was also Vlad Tepes, and he is known as Vlad the Impaler because he tended to stick people on poles if you didn't like him, if he didn't like you.
Yeah.
And the numbers were enormous, 10, 12,000, and he would stick them up along the road that the enemy would be coming, and they would get so disheartened by seeing all these people being literally hung up like that, they would run away. He was very successful in defending that border against the Turks.
Wow.
That became involved with the story that Bram Stoker wrote, and he basically said, we were talking about Vlad the Impaler as Dracula, which was his patronymic name. Now, Brad Stoker wasn't a rich man, and he certainly did not get rich on that story. And as a matter of fact, he had to apply for a grant from the British Literary Society for subsistence even. And after his death, his wife sold his notes and everything for approximately £2. Now Frankenstein was the beginning in the 1800s. Dracula was in the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. While Stoker copyrighted it in Europe, he messed up on the application and it was not protected in the United States. Now, after Stoker had died in and this Dracula was put out in basically 1911 or 1912. A German company, the first movie, silent movie, F.W. Murnau, modeled his vampire movie on Bram Stoker's book, and he called it Nosferatu. And they just recently showed it on television. It's a
Really?
brilliant movie, but it was not permitted. She had not given permission to do it, so she sued the company. They had admitted they changed a few names, but they went to court. She won, but the company had gone bankrupt.
Wow.
So she received only her legal fees, and that was it. Until 1931. Then Dracula here in this country was done with Bela Lugosi. That made Bela as famous as Karloff doing Frankenstein as Dracula. And that original movie is a brilliant classic with people on the trail of how to deal with vampires, that's where we get the idea that garlic is bad for vampires. So go to bed with a string of garlic on thing. And
also the cross, wasn't it?
The cross is another thing they couldn't take, and the light. They couldn't take the light, and they always had to sleep in their own earth from Transylvania.
Very good.
So,
which usually was done in a coffin.
oh yes, yes. The story of the original, Dracula is going to buy a number of estates in London. He's basically tired of the local blood where he is. Maybe there aren't enough people around. So he's going to move to London. And he has arranged these estate deals through Jonathan Harker. And Harker he kept as a prisoner in his castle, and basically fell in love with Harker's wife, the picture, looking at her and saying, she's got a beautiful throat. Which is so, he is going to ship 50 boxes over to London and put them in various places. So that's basically the story between those two classic horror novels. Mm-hmm.
And they are a great part of Halloween.
Oh, you will get more people dressed up. They sell these fangs for at any store that's worth its salt and what have you. The only other classic horror movie. Oh, I should talk. There were two others that get them. One was Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Mm-hmm. Now you get into something folklore. that has to do with shape shifting. How people can shift into animals, wolves, or any other animal. You can get people becoming what they call were-bears, were-bats. Lugosi, of course, in Dracula, was given the property of being able to become a bat. That had to do with its connection to vampire bats that exist in various places. So you get the shape shifting that comes into play with the werewolf. And there's a whole history in folklore of vampires, werewolves. The only thing that is basically, and this is not even unique, Frankenstein, but Godwin's book on the lives of the necromancers has accounts of magicians raising the dead or reliving or revivifying dead bodies. You get sometimes and you say, geez, you know, Jesus did this with Lazarus. Well, historically, there are a lot of other people who claim to have done this. How true they are, these are records that go back hundreds of years. How much do you trust them? But certainly Frankenstein doesn't go back that far. Nor does the novel Dracula. There were a number of other vampire novels at the time, but Dracula has become the standard, the classic for
Very good.
that type of person. I always wondered whether I would like to meet a vampire.
Well, I'm very interested in the fact that you say of yourself, the arcane science of witchcraft and magic.
Yeah.
You really get into that.
Well, remember, Mary Shelley captured in Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, this philosophical concept of creating life. In terms of the goal of a magician to do that, and he was obsessed with it. It ended up destroying him, even though he succeeded in creating life. What's the moral of the story? There's several morals. One, Frankenstein, quote, the monster himself, and his reception by society, or his reaction to society and society to him, is basically tragic. You get his appearance. They never saw past his appearance.
Right.
And so there's that. Then there's the monster himself basically wished to remove himself from that society. He heads to the North Pole, the regions where there are no other people. So there's a lesson to be learned there, I think.
Very good. Never knew that he went to the North Pole.
They say the Arctic regions.
Oh, okay.
In the book, I believe. Yeah.
I understand you're working on a book.
Yes. If you go through the history of the witchcraft trials in Europe, it's a fascinating history. A lot of people were killed because of it. If you go through the legal issues and the societal issues as to why and how this tragedy was allowed to occur in Europe, there were, in several cases, people involved who argued more reasonably than the Inquisition did. Friedrich Spee, for one, said wrote a classic that says, Cautio criminalis, go carefully, obey the law, get the proper rules for evidence. Now, he lost his job because of that. He was probably hounded out of his city. There were a number of other people who objected to the process. It was a process that was taken over by the church at one time, but even the Protestant Reformation, they did very much the same sort of thing. So, of perhaps 7 or 8 cases where you had people speaking out against the unfairness of this of the trials, the witchcraft process, they all had to pay a price for their opposition to it. So basically, these are other voices in other times, but they also have meaning for us today.
Is there a correlation to the old?
Go to the McCarthy era.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Salem, the Salem witch
Salem,
trials?
yes. Now, and of course, Salem is the big holiday for Halloween.
Right.
That's where, in this country, much of it started. Although we had a witchcraft trial here in Plymouth, by the way.
Did we? How
we
interesting.
did. She was found innocent.
Oh.
Yeah, that's one of those.
What did she do?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
That because she wasn't found guilty, there was no
There was
hoopla
no-
about it.
yeah,
There
yeah.
were a number of other cases in New England. John Demos's book, I forget the title of it, but he has a number of those. But of course, Salem was the one where 19 people were hanged,
Yeah.
or at least 18 hanged and 1 pressed to death.
Wow.
The reason being that if you were accused of a crime and then executed, your estate went to the state.
Ah,
Unless this one gentleman would not admit he was a witch. They couldn't hang him. They wanted to get him to confess, so they just laid him on the ground and put weight on his chest
wow.
until he confessed. And they would say after adding another 50 pounds, well, what do you say? And he said, more weight,
Wow.
until he finally was unable to breathe and he suffocated.
But he didn't lose his property.
That's correct. He saved his estate, but he lost his life.
Fascinating, Richard. Fascinating. Thank you so much. We probably will talk about your book after you get more into that.
There are a number of what I will call primary sources
Okay.
for it.
Very
There's one in particular, and it's a letter from somebody who is in prison, being tortured, and is going to be forced to confess
Ooh.
and to implicate other people. And they were tortured. They had a number of processes. One of the processes was, we will take you into the dungeon and we will have the torturer explain to you all that we're going to do to you.
Wow.
Here are the elements, here are the tools, here's what we'll do. Just softening you up, and if you don't even break down there, we'll go ahead and do this.
Wow.
Well, this gentleman managed to smuggle out a letter that basically said, look, and he wrote it to his family, and he said, you cannot believe anything I say. They will torture me until I say whatever they want. There is no hope for us. There is no hope for the other people that I have had to implicate, even though I know nothing about this. We are just being tortured. So my dear family, please pray for me, and I hope you don't get involved in this. So that's a damning sentence.
Yeah. And how are we doing with the sands of time here? It looks like we've made it through a half hour.
Have we?
We
Has it
have.
been? Oh.
There's the proof.
Oh my. Okay.
And thank you.
You agree?
He didn't
Okay.
speak a word.
Right. He hasn't said a word. That's good.
And thank you, Richard.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yes,
And
it is. So sleep well tonight.
and you also. Thank you all out there for listening to us and hopefully enjoying our little part for Halloween. And this is your host for Downtown, Robbie Haig, saying good to see you. Hope to see you again real soon.